So in short, the latest revelation about Dr. A is that he's implicated either as a culpable individual or as a key witness in a crime report which has been sent to Cheshire Police, raising grounds for investigation of the Countess of Chester doctors on suspicion of gross negligence, manslaughter and perverting the course of justice. The crime report was first reported in Private Eye as being raised by highly controversial and also highly intelligent consultant neonatologist Dr. Svelena Dimitrova. Most recently, in their 3rd of September issue, Private Eye reported details suggesting that Dr. Brearey has fabricated some medical records and withheld others in relation to this baby. There is an open question as to how involved Dr. A was in this. So to back up a stage for those who may not have been following the Lucy Letby case so closely, you might remember that the prosecution alleged that Lucy Letby was sabotaging babies to provoke the attention of a certain doctor. The doctor whose attention Lucy Letby was allegedly trying to provoke was known as Dr. A at the first trial. This same Dr. A, whose identity is protected by court order, is the same doctor who played a significant role in what has now been raised by Dr. Svelena Dimitrova as a potential gross negligence manslaughter of the baby known as Baby O. As I understand it, some of the errors made by Dr. A include giving the baby invasive ventilation despite disputed concerns about lung disease, putting the baby on inappropriately high ventilation settings, and leaving the baby in intensive care with only a single peripheral cannula in place, such that the baby's ability to receive fluid and medications was greatly suboptimal. However, it does seem to be Dr. Stephen Brearey who was the individual most implicated in the potential gross negligence manslaughter Baby O, and then in steps that were taken afterwards to obstruct the course of justice. In my opinion, the fact that the prosecution accused Lucy Letby of attention seeking by proxy says or reveals more about the lead prosecution witness, Dr. Dowie Evans, and the senior investigating officer, Paul Hughes. Both of these individuals have referred to Lucy Letby as an attention seeker.
I think there was a need to be the centre of attention.
She clearly does love the attention. I think she's loved the attention of a trial as well.
Dr. Evans has been involved in a number of cases where he has accused other people of attention-seeking disorders. You can see an old newspaper article on screen which links Dr. Evans to Dr. David Southall, a controversial doctor who himself was known during his career for making a diagnosis called Munchausen's by proxy at a very high rate. For those who don't know, Munchausen's by proxy is a mental illness where those afflicted are typically caregivers who induce illness in people they're supposed to be caring for in order to bring attention to themselves. Although legitimate cases are believed to have existed, the mental illness has also been falsely alleged or diagnosed in a string of miscarriages of justice. In Dr. Southall's case, he would expand the diagnosis to include Munchausen's by animal proxy and Munchausen's by internet proxy. Dr. Southall's frequent use of this diagnosis would eventually lead to him being struck off the medical register, although he was later reinstated. Personally, I think the decision to strike him off was the correct one. Another disgraced doctor who Dr. Evans has been linked to is Professor Roy Meadow. Roy Meadow was the expert witness for the prosecution in two of the worst miscarriages of justice of recent times. He would give expert witness testimony beyond his areas of knowledge to convict Angela Cannings and Sally Clark, two mothers whose infants would later be believed to have died from natural causes, though he accused them of murder. Before the courts decided that Angela Cannings and Sally Clark had been wrongfully convicted, Dr. Evans would co-sign a letter complaining about, quote, frivolous and, quote, vexatious, close quote, complaints which supported Professor Meadow amongst other doctors. Dr. Evans had skin in the game though. Years earlier, in a case where Dr. Evans was on the hook for medical negligence, Professor Meadow would co-sign a letter rubber stamping an attention-seeking diagnosis and leading to the extradition of a 12-year-old girl from the USA to the UK, where she would be placed into foster care. Without getting too sidetracked by this issue of attention-seeking disorders, to get the sense of their role in miscarriages of justice, you might want to read this article, quote, "Ministers told child harm theory was flawed." Quoting from the article, quote, "Ministers were warned that the controversial scientific theory Munchausen syndrome by proxy was responsible for serious miscarriages of justice as far back as 1996, according to documents seen by the Observer." For a more recent article on attention-seeking disorders, as it appears their misdiagnosis has been making a comeback, you could read this article, quote, "We demanded help for our sick children. We were accused of abuse," close quote, in the Sunday Times. In this article, the classic form of Munchausen's by proxy is referred to as fabricated induced illness, which is what it has come to be known as in the UK. Reading through an example case they give in the Sunday Times article, quote, "Chappell had no idea that the way she fought her daughter's corner might contribute to a child protection intervention that would risk losing her forever. Chappell's advocacy for Ella's needs, along with unfounded allegations that she had over-medicated her, raised red flags because of a rare form of child abuse known as fabricated or induced illness, where parents exaggerate or cause their children's symptoms." The Times article also cites some numbers saying, quote, "New research shows that fabricated induced illness has been substantiated only in 4 serious case reviews since 2010 and caused no deaths. Yet a snapshot survey by University of Leeds in 2023 found that almost 400 families reported having been accused of fabricated induced illness," close quote. So that's a successful diagnosis rate of just 1%, which I think is far lower than any other suspected illness being diagnosed anywhere in the NHS. In terms of what these attention-seeking allegations say about Paul Hughes, if you look at paragraph 50 of this statement to the Thirlwall Inquiry, which is linked in the description, it contains a description of Lucy Letby as, quote, "painfully shy" on her employment reference. So this suggests to me that Paul Hughes ran an unprofessional investigation if he was capable of ignoring important information, such as that which appeared on an employment reference. Returning back to the main topic of this video, which is Dr. A's role in the care, putting that word care in inverted commas, the care for baby O. One criticism that is consistent across a report written by UK-based neonatologists Drs. Velena Dimitrova and Dr. Neil Eitan, and also in a report written by members of Dr. Lee's panel of experts, is that baby O received inappropriate ventilation pressures. The first question I have with regards to the care received by baby O is, did or didn't the baby require invasive ventilation in the form of a breathing tube? If you look at the summary report by Dr. Lee's panel of experts, they say, quote, "He had mild respiratory distress requiring continuous positive airway pressure and oxygen," close quote. So the baby has breathing problems, but they mention CPAP and Optiflow, which are 2 milder forms of non-invasive ventilation. If you are a pediatrician or neonatologist, please let me know on a technical level what you think of the care this baby received. The panel report does not confirm or deny if mechanical ventilation is required. If you listen to Dr. Richard Taylor summarise the UK-based neonatologists, Dr. Neil Eitan and Drs. Velena Dimitrova's reports, he says the baby had no lung disease.
This baby was placed on very high pressure settings, inappropriate for the fact that the baby actually had no lung disease at all.
Something relevant to point out here is that Dr. Neil Eitan, the co-author of one of the reports into baby O, has a medical research doctorate in neonatal respiratory physiology, so it sounds like he would be knowledgeable about respiratory distress and lung disease. At this point, to avoid confusion, I will point out the various reports on baby O. There is the crime report authored by Drs. Velena Dimitrova, which has gone to Cheshire Police. Then there is a defence report, also authored by Drs. Velena Dimitrova and also Dr. Neil Eitan, which was announced at a press conference in December and summarised mostly by another neonatologist, Dr Richard Taylor. There is another report authored by two experts from overseas who were brought to the case by Professor Shu Lee. Then there is a report which was authored by Dr Jane Horden as part of the hospital review process before the criminal case. I think there was also another hospital review immediately after the boy's death. I'm not sure if this had much in the way of objective expert input, but did at least look at factors such as punctuality. There is also the post-mortem report by Dr George Kakai. Then there are the prosecution reports led by Dr Dowie Evans, with other prosecution witnesses forming an opinion after reading his reports. I'm mainly looking at the reports by Drs Dimitrova and Eisen here, and comparing the publicly known details of those reports with the reports of overseas experts brought to the case by Professor Shu Lee. These reports share a number of features in common. The reports by the prosecution experts headed by Dr Evans are drastically different and not credible in my opinion. So now let's start to look at some of Dr A's testimony during the court case. There are a couple of red flags, I think, that Dr A gave self-serving and dishonest testimony. The first red flag, I think, is that Dr A appears to have a good memory when it suits him, and a bad memory also when it suits him. I will tie this in with the case of baby N, which I will address later in the video. Early on in Dr A's testimony, day 89, 15th of March, the prosecutor puts it to Dr A, quote, "So that was your examination and response around 13-15 hours on 23rd of June. At that stage, did you feel the need to move baby O from where he was currently being housed, or did he remain where he was, or can't you recall?" Dr A responds, "I know that he moves from nursery 2 to nursery 1 at some point. I don't recall whether it was after this event or after something else." Later on day 89, Dr A's memory of moving baby O to nursery 1, the intensive care nursery, becomes much clearer. The prosecutor puts it to him, quote, "Why is it that you deemed it necessary for baby O to be transferred from one nursery to another at this juncture?" Dr A responds, "So baby O's needing 100% oxygen, he's needing active support with his breathing, and he's got a low heart rate that's not normal for a 3-day-old baby. He needs more intervention, and it's likely that he's going to need intubating and mechanical ventilation. That needs to be in an intensive care setting." Close quote. The big mistake here is that when Dr A moves the baby to intensive care, he does so with a single peripheral cannula in place. As mentioned briefly before, this means the baby has limited ability to receive fluid and medications. Furthermore, it will later emerge that the baby has significant internal bleeding. The fact that the baby only has a single intravenous cannula in place would impair the baby's ability to receive a blood transfusion and clotting factors to mitigate and reduce the blood loss. This exchange from day 89 is relevant to what I've just described. The prosecutor puts it to Dr A, quote, "And why would it have been deemed desirable to get further venous excess?" Dr A responds, "Over the last 15 minutes, baby O had 2 doses of adrenaline, 1 of bicarb, and a fluid bolus. So this gives you the idea that when the crisis hits, they will quickly need to give fluid and medication. However, this is later in the day, at a crisis point. There was a point earlier in the day when Dr A could have given the baby further lines, such as an umbilical venous catheter or a long line to administer medications via the saphenous vein. Dr A describes giving the baby a series of fluids and medications over a short time period. Dr A fails to mention that the baby wasn't given a transfusion of blood and platelets, which could have formed clots." Continuing with this segment, Dr A says, quote, "I suspect he only has 1 cannula in place at this time," close quote, which seems to be a strange way of putting it, as you would have thought this detail would be clearly recorded in the medical records. Dr A then says, quote, "If that one goes, then there is no way of administering venous medication to him. this is the time to get ahead, close quote. I think the actual time to get ahead would have been when the baby was moved to intensive care. The prosecutor then says, quote, so these interventions are best done whilst the baby is stable, close quote. Dr. A responds, quote, that's right, yes, close quote. However, the words of Dr. A are out of sync with his actions. There is a 2-hour gap between him moving the baby to intensive care and the period where he gives a series of fluids and medications in a short period of time. Having considered the baby in enough of a fragile state to be moved to intensive care, then I would have thought it would also have been an idea to introduce additional lines. The next area of the baby's care whereby Dr. A is implicated in significant suboptimal practice is the decision to subject the baby to very high ventilation pressures. The high pressures started with Dr. A, though I'm not sure if the pressures were further increased by Dr. Brearey or if it's an issue of the communication between the two of them. Reading through what Dr. A testified to on day 89 of the trial, quote, Baby O had required rather larger than normal pressures on the neopuff circuit when he was moved from nursery 2 to nursery 1, close quote. So we know that it is Dr. A who has instructed that move. Dr. A then says, quote, I would have looked at the ventilator settings. They had been set on a pressure of 24/5. I think that's 24 as the peak inspiratory pressure and 5 as the positive end expiratory pressure. Dr. A then says, quote, if that ventilator pressure hadn't been adequate to deliver oxygen to him, I'm likely to have increased the pressures on the neopuff circuit in order to open that chest up a little bit more with each inflation breath. The first mention of ventilation pressures in the panel summary from Dr. Lee's panel of experts is here, quote, he was intubated and ventilated with high pressure, 28/5, close quote. We have seen from the transcript that he was in fact first ventilated at 24/5. So this detail could be an error suggesting perhaps that this report from Dr. Lee's panel wasn't one of the more diligent ones. It could also just be due to the fact that this is a summary of the report. Dr. A mentions increasing the ventilation pressure when it's set at 24/5, so presumably at this point the ventilation pressure was increased to 28/5. The summary report by Dr. Lee's panel then says, quote, his ventilation pressures were increased to 32/6 in 100% oxygen, close quote. So I think it's harder to tell who would have been responsible for the further increase in ventilation pressure. It could have been Dr. A, it could have been Dr. Brearey, it could also have been a third consultant who was on the scene, an anonymous female consultant who was known as Dr. B during the court case and who, like Dr. A, has her identity protected by court order. It could also have been a miscommunication between them. Remember, we know from Dr. Taylor the baby apparently had no lung disease.
This baby was placed on very high pressure settings, inappropriate for the fact that the baby actually had no lung disease at all.
It has been reported in Private Eye that Dr. Dimitrova considers the ventilation pressures to have been so high that they could have killed the baby by themselves by causing vasoconstriction and decreasing venous return to the heart. For the next major events that would unfold, Dr. A is likely more of a witness, although I think he should still be questioned over what he knew as part of the reporting process. The baby's abdomen would swell up, a bowel obstruction was suspected, and I doubt the ventilation pressures helped. Dr. Brearey would then respond by inserting a needle into the abdomen, with the intention of relieving air pressure in the gut.
The needle perforated the liver. The baby was still being ventilated with a needle in the liver. The liver was now being lacerated.
A needle was blindly inserted into the abdomen to try and relieve the abdominal distension. Well, this is something you don't do, and you don't do blindly.
I should say that although whoever wrote the report as part of Dr. Lee's panel acknowledged that a needle was blindly inserted, they are not certain that the needle hit the liver. A number of details have recently emerged suggesting that the Countess of Chester doctors knew they had something to hide, Starting with what has been most recently reported in Private Eye, reading through this excerpt from Lucy Letby case, part 28, quote, "Two new experts argue that page 97 of the evidence is a resuscitation sheet that clearly shows a large drop in hemoglobin after Dr. Stephen Brearey inserted a needle in the region of the liver. However, Brearey documented it in the notes as if the fall in hemoglobin had happened before the needle insertion. Dr. Mike Hall, who was the defense expert witness at the first Lucy Letby trial, told MD he never saw page 97. Was it missed or omitted?" So, to do a recap on the fall in hemoglobin, looking at the Lucy Letby case part 24 in a previous edition of Private Eye. The resuscitation sheet details a stable hemoglobin level of 197.9. At 17:25, it was recorded that Dr. Brearey put a cannula in the abdomen, which was on the right side, and drew back blood. At 17:43, the hemoglobin had fallen by more than a half, to 86. If you are a pediatrician or a neonatologist, please let me know in the comments what you think of this process. So as I understand it, the fall in hemoglobin is representative of a drop in red blood cells, as hemoglobin is the oxygen carrying part of the red blood cell. As the liver has in theory been perforated by the needle, the liver is now bleeding into space between the internal organs. A mixture of extracellular and resuscitation fluid now rush into the bloodstream, diluting the blood. I've seen Dr. Dimitrova say that the fact that the hemoglobin had fallen by half, as the reading from the blood gas analyzer suggested, does not mean that the baby had lost 50% of its red blood cells. I guess the overall process is more complicated, but the bottom line is that the fall in hemoglobin indicates there has been significant bleeding. The alternative theory put forward by members of Dr. Lee's panel is that the liver ruptured spontaneously, and the fact that a needle was inserted where an X-ray showed the liver was is just a coincidence. Since the alternative theory was put forward by members of Dr. Lee's panel, some have discounted the Dimitrova and Eitan explanation. I will say that I don't know much about Dr. Dimitrova's background. I have heard that she has ruffled feathers in the recent past with outspoken views on the war between Israel and Palestine. Academically, from what I've seen, she got her medical degree from Imperial College London. If you look at the most recent QS University World Rankings, it's ranked as the second best university in the world, a better university than Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, etc. So although I think she considers herself a hands-on practitioner, to a significant extent, she also has extremely strong schooling academically. If you contrast that with members of Dr. Lee's panel, although most of them likely didn't just get into medical school because the government were looking to train a certain amount of doctors, they stand out in particular because they hold managerial positions. I think Dr. Dimitrova's academic credentials are likely very similar to members of Dr. Lee's panel. Personally, although I would have to say it's speculative from my vantage point, I tend to think that the explanation put forward by Drs. Dimitrova and Eitan is more likely an accurate description of what actually happened. At present time, from what I understand, Cheshire Police have refused to investigate Dr. Brearey, either for perverting the course of justice or for gross negligence manslaughter. So the last thing I shall say about Dr. A in this video, which is separate to the Baby O case, is that I highly suspect in the case of Baby N, he gave dishonest testimony about his failure to put in a breathing tube. If you look at how Dr. A's cross-examination on the Baby N case is summarised in the court report, Myers is asking the doctor when he saw the blood in child N's throat. He said, "I believe blood was there in insertion attempt number 1. Myers puts it to him that if you can't see, you wouldn't attempt it. He replies, "You can do, if quite certain of position." So Dr. A is saying he saw blood before attempting to put in the breathing tube, which leaves it open to the idea that it was Lucy Letby who caused the blood. However, the defense lawyer Ben Myers seems to catch Dr. A out, reading through the court report. Mr. Myers has just quoted the doctor's police statement from 2018. In this, he says he was not sure if the bleeding was his fault due to his attempts to move the tongue with a medical implement to intubate. So Dr. A is essentially expecting people to believe that his memory improved years after the event, coincidentally around the time that the finger of suspicion was being pointed overwhelmingly in the direction of Lucy Letby and away from him. If you look now at how a specialist doctor described the case of baby N in Private Eye, the Lucy Letby case, part 9, quote, "As for baby N, Dr. Ali states, in my opinion, the blood in the airway obviously came from the first attempt at intubation. I know this because I have intubated hundreds of babies. I have also taught hundreds of doctors how to do this. Sadly, despite the greatest care, I have caused bleeding many times with my laryngoscope. I have also caused bleeding by trying to introduce an endotracheal tube. So in conclusion, I have great doubts that the convictions of Lucy Letby have done anything to serve patient safety or justice. At some point, I think there needs to be a more competent and honest investigation into what happened at the hospital, carried out by an organisation who are not Cheshire Police."